Welcome to the final days. Today is July 19th, 2019. Today we will be viewing strange celestial objects in our sky not mentioned by mainstream media. All of the things you are about to see are signs that we are living in the very last days according to the Holy Bible. Later in this video, I'll explain why this is very good news and cause for celebration. The images we are viewing were obtained over the past week from the Federal Aviation weather cameras in Alaska and Canada. Something I forgot to say earlier in these videos is that you, the viewers, have my full permission to use any part of my videos. Like you, my only interest is in getting the truth out. I make no money from this. I don't care about views or numbers. So please share any parts of any of my videos without worrying about copyright infringements. Our first video was taken from the north-facing weather camera located in North Slope, Alaska. The sun appears to be passing over top of a celestial object, while a bell-shaped projector passes by in the opposite direction. Actually, it's a reflection of the bell-shaped projector. It's not the real item. What's really happening here is that NASA's circular glare, which tracks in synchronization with our sun, is passing in front of this object while the real sun passes behind it, so that it's not obvious that a solar eclipse is occurring here. Three hours later, the east-facing camera in the same town of North Slope, Alaska, captures the sun passing by another such object in the sky. This is one of hundreds, possibly thousands, of sky lenses. These lenses were put into place to bend light, blur objects, and otherwise cloak objects from public view. Untold trillions have been spent on the smoke and mirrors to hide the inbound planetary system that has now intermingled with our own solar system. The reason for hiding this massive system is because the enemies of Christ do not want you to know how close to the end we are. The enemies of Christ do not want you to turn your life over to Jesus before your time runs out. Information is at the end of this video telling you how to accept Christ into your life. We know this object cannot possibly be a lens flare of the sun because it is being partially illuminated as the sun passes by overhead. A camera-produced lens flare can never become partially illuminated by the object causing the lens flare. The east-facing camera in Point Lay, Alaska, shows the sun rising in the morning after 7 a.m. local time. Everything looks pretty normal until the sun completely disappears behind a thin electrical conduit post. Just 10 minutes ago, this was the size of the sun. How could our sun, which is 864,000 miles in diameter, possibly disappear behind an object this small? Here's an IQ test regarding this situation. Look at the sun's circular light underneath the words in this image. Something is creating that circular light. Now, to the eye, how large must the object be that's creating that circular light in order to disappear behind this thin post? Must the source of the light be size A, the green circle on the left, or B, or the red circle C? If you guessed B, you are correct. To disappear behind this post, the source creating the light you are seeing can only appear a couple inches in diameter to the eye. Not the actual dimension, which is over 800,000 miles, but to the camera's eye. Here's another similar IQ test. Look carefully at this older footage from Burwash in the Yukon Territory of Canada. It shows a 6-pointed light source. please, in the sky, passing behind a flagpole. It completely disappears behind the flagpole before going over the horizon for the night. To disappear behind a thin flagpole, must the size of the light source to the eye be A, the yellow circle on the left, or B, or C? If you guessed B, you are correct. To disappear behind this thin flagpole, to the eye, the diameter of the source creating the sunlight can only appear as large as the diameter of the flagpole, actually just a tad less. Here's another similar IQ test. Look carefully at this older footage from Prince Rupert, British Columbia in Canada. Ignore the vertical lens flare, which is typical of the Canadian FAA cameras. This footage shows the sun passing behind a tiny bird feeder post. The sun completely disappears behind the thin bird feeder post. To disappear behind this thin bird feeder post, must the size of the light source to the eye be A, the large circle on the left, or B, or C on the right? If you guessed C, you are correct. To disappear behind this thin bird feeder post, to the eye, the diameter of the light source creating the sunlight can only appear as large as the diameter of a bird feeder post. When shown this picture and asked which one looks like the real sun, the average 3-year-old will always point to the larger yellow circle. Even children know what our sun is supposed to look like. Of course, our real sun could never be hidden behind a thin flagpole or a tiny bird feeder post. That's absolutely ridiculous. When Jesus speaks about the last days in Luke chapter 21, verse 25, he tells us that we will see signs in the sky when the end is near. As Christians, we are commanded to watch for the signs of the end of the age so that we can be spiritually prepared, help others be spiritually prepared, and so that we are not ignorant of the very late hour in which we are living. Thus, when the FAA weather camera, or any camera for that matter, is pointing directly at the source, creating the sunlight you just saw, it shows up as a black dot, which casts its own reflection upon the water, such as this image from Teller, Alaska. The reflection in the water tells us that the black dot is real, and not a camera or lighting issue. To find out where the real sun is, please watch our March 3rd video. There just isn't time to explain it here. But I can briefly tell you that our real sun is being eclipsed much of the day by more than one object. The Hearst, Ontario camera shows the actual size of the source creating what appears to be our sunlight, as the sunlight appears to become whittled down to a tiny dot. This tiny dot, to the eye, is definitely capable of becoming hidden behind a bird feeder post or a flagpole, as well as this miniature sun rising up from the east, captured by many, many FAA weather cameras. This one just happens to be Fort Yukon, Alaska. Numerous cameras across Alaska and Canada now show the sun rising as a tiny dot. Does anyone actually think this is our real sun? If so, you may have failed the IQ test a couple minutes ago. And here's another one from Minto, Alaska, showing the sun as a tiny dot. However, as tiny as it looks, it is capable of producing a circular glare thousands of miles in diameter. Look at the size of this circular glare, and just imagine that the source creating this glare can hide behind a very thin post. As mentioned earlier, the enemies of Christ do not want you to know how close to the end we are. The technology being used to hide this inbound planetary system is no doubt fallen angel technology. They've been here far longer than we have, and they are much smarter than we are. In this south-facing image from Deering, Alaska, can you find the hidden celestial orb floating through the sky? The sky lenses we looked at a few minutes ago help to obscure these objects from view. Additionally, it's very well faded by the atmospheric chemicals. Here's a hint. Look where the yellow arrow is pointing. Some contrast is added to help bring this object into view better. But even with the contrast, it is still difficult to see. These objects eclipse our sun multiple times daily. On a perfectly cloudless day, the landscape here in Shizmarev, Alaska, and the sky are dark in one photo, and only 10 minutes later, noticeably brighter. The only thing that can possibly cause this on a cloudless day is something eclipsing the sun. An extreme case of this was back in March, viewed from Attawapiskat, Ontario in Canada. The sun suddenly appears to shrink down to 1/5 its size. The sky and landscape suddenly darken as the real sun goes behind a dark nebula, and NASA's manufactured light passes in front of it during a 4-hour period. So basically our sun was eclipsed for 4 hours. Simple logic tells us that the naked eye could never see a nebula behind the real sun 93 million miles away. This is just impossible. NASA's light actually illuminates part of this nebula as it passes over it, as you can see here. 4 hours later, the real sun emerges from behind the nebula, resumes its normal size again, and the sky and landscape suddenly become brighter again. The southeast-facing camera in Lloydminster, Alberta in Canada shows darkness on a perfectly cloudless day around noontime locally, and then 10 minutes later it's noticeably brighter. Once again, an eclipse. And then in Ambler, Alaska, look at the round tank at the bottom of this photo. This is a cloudless day also, and it goes from bright to dark in only 10 minutes in midday. Muskrat Dam in Ontario shows the same thing. In only 10 minutes, a cloudless sky goes from light to dark in the middle of the day. Here's a quiz. In the morning, a light source begins to emerge from behind the mountain in Onoktuvok Pass, Alaska. Is this the sun? Watch closely as the light source rises up into the sky. Eventually, it becomes obscured by the lenses and atmospheric chemicals. But surprisingly, that was not the sun. 90 minutes later, NASA's manufactured light rises up out of the black chemical haze in synchronization with our sun. This is a trick question. The correct answer is that neither of these was our sun. Images that show this inbound system are removed routinely from these FAA cameras. I only get what they miss. Many times in the southwestern corner of Canada, an incredible number of images are removed daily if there's not enough cloud cover to hide the sky. This occurs in the morning hours normally of cameras that are facing east and northeast. The area which has the largest number of images removed from the camera is within the red circle here, found in southwestern Canada. Here we see that 25% of all the images have been removed from the camera. Just above the photo, you'll see 2 rows of small squares. A white square indicates that the photo was removed, such as a few which are pointed out here in this close-up in Hearst. Here's our flagpole again that we saw earlier from the west-facing camera in Burwash in the Yukon Territory of Canada, only this is a very recent photo. Look above the photo and notice how many white squares there are. These photos have been removed. If we count them in this close-up of Burwash, we see that nearly 50% of the images have been removed from this camera. The south-facing camera in the same town, Burwash, shows a similar scenario. If we count the white squares above the photo, we see that 40% of the images have been removed from this camera. If we think logically about this, if there were absolutely nothing to hide, why bother to remove all these images? If there were nothing to hide, why spend trillions of dollars to hide this inbound planetary system, which will make its closest pass to Earth during the biblically foretold 7-year period that the Bible calls the Great Tribulation, which obviously is very near? The Seward, Alaska cameras frequently show a red, fast-rotating celestial orb, which today is very faded by the atmospheric chemicals. This close-up shows how large this object looks in relation to the mountain range below it. Just to the left of the red orb, we see a much larger object that is even more obscured by the atmospheric chemicals and can only be seen by turning up the contrast very high, and even at that it's still hard to see. Here, the gigantic celestial orb shows up as a circular shadow. The red circle helps to mark its exact location on the screen. As we move through this footage, the contrast images help to show that the smaller red orb is rotating. We know this cannot be a lens flare of the sun because it's rotating much faster than our sun rotates. Our sun rotates only once every 27 Earth days. Just before 6 o'clock in the morning, we see the black center of NASA's glare-producing equipment rising up, as viewed from the northeast-facing camera in Nenana, Alaska. Notice how that huge circular glare is completely hidden behind the small clouds, which are much smaller to the eye than the diameter of the circular glare. The same principle is occurring here that we saw just a few minutes ago as the sun disappeared behind a thin post. And as the morning goes on, we see the sun eclipsing another celestial object on the right side of the screen. These celestial objects are hidden with lenses and atmospheric chemicals. These images with contrast show the object that is eclipsing NASA's manufactured light. During these multiple daily eclipses, NASA's light passes in front of the celestial object, with the real sun passing behind it, so that an eclipse is not obvious. Just like the nebula that we saw a few minutes ago, the NASA's light passed in front of it, while the real sun passed behind it. All of this is actually good news and cause for celebration, because Jesus has promised to remove his faithful followers from earth before God's wrath is unleashed upon the earth. This is commonly called the rapture, which will take place quickly and quietly just before God's wrath, which occurs during the 7-year period called the Great Tribulation. The New King James Version of Luke chapter 21, verse 36 reads, "Watch therefore, and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass." Jesus is referring to God's wrath. He's saying that those who are counted worthy will escape all God's wrath. The Bible repeatedly promises that faithful followers of Christ are not appointed to God's wrath. To be counted worthy, we must be living in holiness. A link in the description box below discusses what holiness is and how to achieve it. These next few screens will tell you how to accept Christ into your life. Simply pause the screen if you need more time to read the text.